This is Lewis Hart for the Ring magazine. It's my pleasure to be joined with Dan Rafael here on another Monday. Yeah, 2 in 2 weeks, and I could not get you on after everything that's unfolded this weekend. But before, first things first, Dan, how's things? How are you?
Quite the weekend, right, Lewis? Things are good.
Absolutely, it was.
A little
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, yeah, very crazy. But I guess we'll start on before we do get into controversy. Just your overall thoughts on the PBC show that happened at the Barclays Centre on Saturday night. Obviously, new world champions in Gervonta and Russell, Alberto Puello defending his title. We'll get into the main event. But what was your overall thoughts on the whole show?
Oh, I thought it was a good show. I enjoyed it. I expected to be a good show when they made the match. The one fight on there that I was sort of a little shaky on. I mean, not that it wasn't a worthy matchup and that was a mandatory fight and all that. And they're two very good boxers in Puello and Sandor Martin. But having watched a lot of their fights over the years, I was sort of like, well, I don't know if that one's going to be very good. So while it wasn't going to be in anybody's list or fight of the year, it exceeded my expectations. So from that standpoint, it turned out to be pretty decent. And look, I thought it was a good card. I mean, if you start at the beginning of the pay-per-view, well, first of all, in the free preliminaries, I was, saddened, if you will, to watch a one-time top champion like Jarrett Hurd, now, who was a former unified junior middleweight champ, getting his rear end kicked at middleweight and retiring after the fight, which he said he was going to do if he lost. And, I've known Jarrett a long time, covered his whole career, good dude, hell of a fighter at his best, was in some tremendous battles, fight of the year in 2018 against Arislandi Lara. So to watch him, lose the way he did, just kind of, lost mostly every round against a journeyman kind of opponent, it was kind of disappointing, but he retired. I hope him, he's good in retirement, has a productive rest of his life. He's still a young guy. That was one of the free preliminaries. When they got to the main card, look, I've been high on the 154-pound prospect, Yoenis Tejas, for the last couple of years. He's a really good, talented fighter. He took a massive step up against Julian Williams, who was a former unified champion in that division, actually had defeated Jarrett Hurd, back in a world title fight back a few years ago. And even though maybe even though Julian Williams maybe not at his best anymore, still a pretty solid fighter and was without question the best opponent that Tejas had fought. And Tejas looked great. He, out hustled him, out fought him, out punched him, out boxed him, out everything. Them gave up the first round and then basically won the rest of the fight. So he wins the WBA's interim junior middleweight title, which I know we all like to bust on the interim titles, but in this particular case, it's going to probably become a world title in the not too distant future, because who's the champ of the WBA at 154? It's Terrence Crawford, who is highly unlikely to defend that title with his plans to fight at 168 later in the year against Canelo Alvarez. So that's a big win for young Yoenis Tejas. And then they went on to the other title fights. You mentioned about Puello. He looked pretty good. Martin looked pretty good. It was a split decision. I thought Martin eked it out. I thought he won close, but Puello gets the win. And you mentioned Gary Antoine Russell, who lost his last fight in his first world title bout, which was for the interim title against Puello by a split decision. Puello was later elevated when Haney vacated, but he went out against Rayo Valenzuela in like a storm. I thought Rayo was going to maybe win the fight, and Gary Russell ran him out of the ring, basically. He started right out of the gate, was just out-punched him, out-jabbed him, speed, movement, game plan, and flustered him and just did everything he wanted to other than get a knockout. Gary had been 17-1, and all of his wins were by knockout going into that fight. Now he's 18-1. He went the distance in this win, but he won every round. I mean, to me, I was kind of joking around. You can make all the controversies you want about what happened with the controversy in the main event with Tank and Roach. I was joking that the biggest controversy to me, that two judges actually gave 1 round apiece to Jose Rayo Valenzuela in that fight, where instead of a shutout, because it was so dominant from Gary Russell. He's a heck of a fighter. His brother, who was his trainer, is the former WBC featherweight champion, was a superb boxer in his best days. And Gary Russell is a very talented fighter. The only thing I say about that is I wish he fought more often, because he only fights basically once a year and has been extremely inactive. I mean, he's got 19 fights in a career that's almost a decade old. So, I'd like to see him fight a little bit more, but he did a great job.
Yeah, as I say, it's definitely going to be some exciting fights for Gary Russell. But let's touch on the main event. Before we do get into everything that happened in the ninth round, which is obviously a major talking point, it's sort of hard not to touch on it. What did you make of Gervonta Davis against Lamont Roach? Many people thought it would sort of be standard procedure against for Gervonta Davis, but this one ended up being a majority draw. Many people thought Lamont Roach could have nicked it, but what was your thoughts on those 12 rounds that they shared?
Well, he should have won the fight because they didn't call the knockdown. And if he called the
Mm.
knockdown, he wins a unanimous decision. But put that to the side in terms of the actual fight. Look, I was not one of those people that said this was a basic win for Tank. I mean, look, I picked Tank to win the fight. I'm not going to bullshit that. But I said for the first moment that the fight was made, this is a real fight. And all the people that didn't like the match or were complaining about the matchup and said, well, why isn't Tank fighting this guy or why isn't he fighting that guy? And I'm like, okay, listen, maybe Lamont Roach is not the biggest name. And maybe he's not the matchup that you so desire the most, whether it was against Shakur or Teofimo Lopez or somebody like that. But don't sleep on Lamont Roach. He's a quality boxer, a really good fighter, has a good background, knows Tank for many, many years. They go back to their days as kids in the amateur ranks. They fought each other 2 times in the amateurs. I know that for a period of time it was Lamont's father, Lamont Sr., who was also his son's trainer. But during the amateur days, he spent some time as a coach for Tank Davis. Tank and Lamont, while maybe not the best of friends, they've known each other and are friendly for years. They all run in the same circles because of the fact that they're from the same area, meaning the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. So they've been in the same camps, the same gyms, the same amateur competitions. They know each other. And I believed very, very strongly that when Gervonta took the fight, he knew that this was not necessarily an easy fight. Maybe the public thought it because they just didn't know who Lamont Roach was. And they look and say, well, back, 5 years ago, he lost a competitive decision against Jamel Herring in a world title fight. And I'm here to tell you that boxers are able to improve and get better and change things and mature as people and as fighters. And Lamont Roach is an example of that. He's gotten much, much better. And if you go back and watch his last few fights, he's looked a lot better than maybe he did in some of the previous fights that he had. So it was a real fight. I felt that way as the way the fight unfolded. Typical Tank, didn't throw a lot of punches, kind of boring, being honest. I mean, the first 5-6 rounds on both of their, both parts, because they were wanting to, Tank always wants to try to set things up and see what he's got. I know Lamont, I believe that he was being cautious because he understood the kind of punching power, didn't want to get caught making a stupid mistake, even though he, bragged about how good his chin was and never been down as a professional or an amateur. Still same thing after the fight with Tank. But in the I believe it was probably the 6th or the 7th round, things started to pick up, and they had some good exchanges, and it was a highly competitive fight. I mean, even some of the rounds you may have shaded for one guy or the other, perhaps could have gone the other direction. It was that kind of close fight. But then came the 9th round. I'm sure you want to touch on that.
Absolutely, and yeah, we'll touch on the 9th round. Seemed like sort of standard procedure, standard round going on. So Gervonta Davis backs up, takes a knee, momentary, runs to the corner. Obviously, we now know it was Reese that he said was burning his eye, gets it wiped off. Steve Willis, referee, comes over. I don't really know if he was ready to administer a count. I think he was very confused.
He started the count, Lewis.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. For me, I don't like. I don't. Does he say? Because I was trying to look at the video.
So first of all, if you back up before Gervonta Davis took the knee, you had Lamont Roach firing 3 punches. A right hand. I watched it like 1,000 times in the last couple of days. He threw a right hand and he threw 2 quick left hands behind it. And within like a split second, a beat after that, Lamont took the knee. So while I couldn't tell from watching the broadcast and seeing the replay, the right hand I don't believe connected. But one of those jabs probably did connect. And whatever the reason, if he had the grease in his eye, I'm not saying it was from the ferocity of the punch, but if you've got something in your eye and then you get hit, even if it's light, maybe it's going to cause a reaction. So he took the knee after 3 punches were thrown. I've watched hundreds of thousands of fights in my life. I mean, probably, maybe, who knows how many fights I've watched. 45 years of watching boxing, 25 years of covering it. Dude, that's a knockdown, period. I don't understand how that could not be a knockdown. And so you asked about Steve Willis. The sequence occurred, and when Tank ran to his corner, simultaneously, Steve Willis, you can watch the video, he sends Roach to the neutral corner, and he he picks up the count from the timekeeper, and he starts to administer the 8 count, standard procedure, as you said, standard 8 count. You're going to then wipe off the gloves, presumably, and you let him go back to fight. He was getting okay, now you go to the corner, and Tank he shouts something to the corner. He leans his head between the ropes. And Calvin Ford, who's one of his coaches, comes up the stairs with a white towel and goes to wipe off his face. Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on there. My initial reaction was, I see a coach up a step with a white towel. I'm thinking they're throwing in the towel and they're going to resign the fight. That was my first thought, which was sort of weird to me because it wasn't like Tank was any kind of, even if he went down from the punch or the grease, it wasn't like he was in duress to stop the fight. So that was the first thing. Then I realized he's wiping his face off. Okay, a couple things. A, not allowed against the rules. You can't go to your corner during the round. Sure as hell can't get your face wiped off in the round. The only time I've ever seen that, and this happens on a regular basis, but you got to get the referee to do it, is sometimes a fighter may come out of the corner after the rest period and they don't like how much Vaseline is over your eye or something along those lines, and they'll call a timeout and ask the coach to wipe it off. That happens, but not because the referee is doing an 8 count to the other guy and the fighter who is the one that went down gets up and runs to the corner on his own. He basically took a timeout. You can't call a timeout in boxing. The referee can call a timeout, but not the boxer. So even if you accept the fact that Steve Willis missed the knockdown and didn't call it, and therefore he doesn't get a 10-8 round, at the very least, now you got to take, you can or you should take a point either for the guy turning his back and running to the corner against the rules, B, having the second come up the steps to wipe the face off. That could be another point. That could actually be a disqualification. I mean, the point I've been making to people who've asked me about this over the last couple of days since it happened is there were a multitude of things that Steve Willis could have done to in somehow, some way penalize Gervonta Davis for that situation. Yet he did none of them. Fight resumes. He even went to Tank. You hear him on the microphone. He says, "What's that about?" Now, I don't know what Tank said back to him because Tank did not have a microphone on. And then Steve Willis says to him, "Look, that looks like a knockdown. You can't do that," or whatever. I forget the exact words. And then he tapped him on the chest. He's like, "All right." And then he called Roach back to the fight. So I'm like, what are we doing here? That's a knockdown. End of fucking story.
I was going to say, and when you look at the result of the fight, how bad it makes it even worse knowing that obviously it was a majority draw, and knowing with all the things that you just said there, Roach would end up getting a decision. Like, you know, when you are factoring all those reasons as well, like it just emphasizes how bad of a decision it really was.
It was like a cascade of mistakes, of errors that are ridiculous. Because here's the thing about it. Generally speaking, and I've seen Steve Willis do numerous fights through the years. Steve Willis has a reputation as a very good referee. I mean, I've met Steve Willis on several occasions. Personable guy, nice guy, been a good referee for a long time, but had a terrible night. I mean, that's all there is to it. And it wasn't one mistake. It was one mistake on top of another, on top of another. I mean, and it's one thing for that to happen, but to happen in that spotlight for that magnitude of a fight. This was not a 4-rounder, which I'm not excusing screwing up in a 4-rounder, but it certainly doesn't have the magnitude of a main event of a major pay-per-view on a world championship fight, with one of the biggest names in the sport. And by the way, Lamont Roach may not be a superstar name, but he's a world champion at 130 pounds. This is not, some jamoke that's in the fight. This is a real fighter, a real legit guy. And it was just a complete disaster. And it was very disappointing that he got no assistance from his own commission that basically hung him out to dry, because the replay situation was not working properly, apparently, or if it was working okay, it's one of two things. And I've talked to the commission and I've talked to people that were in the production truck. And so depending on who you believe, there was issues regardless. On the one side, they say we sent them the replay and he looked at the replay and told us they decided not to do any kind of intervention because they didn't see a punch land or whatever their reasons were. And on the other hand, you have commission people saying, well, we asked for the replay, and because we were having technology issues both at that moment as well as during requests for certain replays to assess cuts, whether they're caused by punches or headbutts during the undercard, we didn't get it in a timely enough fashion because under the rules, they only have a certain period of time to use the replay to make a call. I'm under the impression, or I was told by the people at the commission, that they have the remainder of the time left in the round. In this case, there was about 2 minutes or so left in the round, plus the 1-minute rest period. And then if they decide to, they can invoke an additional 30 seconds. So you're talking about around 3.5 minutes to make the call. And supposedly, again, who you believe, who knows, that either they looked at it and they decided not to call the knockdown, or they say, as they say, that they didn't get it in time to look at it. And so when the time expired, even though they looked at it after the fact and thought it was a knockdown, they couldn't make the change because the rules don't permit it to be done. So after the time expires that they're allowed to do it. I know it's a little confusing, but the bottom line is the replay, which is supposed to help and assist to get a call right, was either not utilized or not utilized properly.
With that put in mind as well. Do you think that does that factor any potential like appeal or overturn of a
No
result? Do you think?
question. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
because
They will. I mean, I haven't spoken to the Roach team. I'll actually call them at some point later today, and I'll just inquire what their plans are. But I have to believe that the Roach team will appeal to the commission, which the commission said they are entitled to do, and they'll give them a hearing and listen to what they have to say. And I believe, based on what the commission told me, that it is not out of the realm of possibility that they could change the non-knockdown to a knockdown, change the scorecard, which would then give him the win. And it is possible. Again, I haven't seen the rules, and I haven't been told this officially, but the people I talk to say, yeah, I think it's in our rules that we theoretically could change the result of the fight. Now, whether that will actually occur or not, I don't know. But I do know it's a huge controversy, and you have a lot of people that just look really bad today, and the probability of there being a rematch to settle the score.
yeah, I was going to ask you about the rematch, but before that, Dan, as I say, you've been a member of the media for many, many years. And it's always an interesting debate I had. But do you think more needs to be done when it comes to, especially in a situation like round 9 with Steve Willis, where they need to be held accountable in terms of questioning or wherever it may be with referees and judges?
No question. I mean, I've said this before to others as well. Some people make it out like those of us in the media that do this job that are, people have a misunderstanding of what our role is. I've always viewed my role as a member of the boxing media as a conduit to the public, to ask the questions that the public would like to ask. Now, I happen to be in a situation where I have the access and the credentials to do so, but I do it on behalf of my readers and boxing fans that want information. And so when you confront or talk too nicely or ask about that, you hope that they'll come through and they'll provide the information. The problem is, it's not like me and others who do this job have never tried to talk to a judge or a referee about whatever the situation is. It's that the commission most of the time won't allow them to speak publicly to the press. And I've said this before also. I know several referees and judges through my days covering boxing who would love to talk to the media if they were allowed to. But the commission doesn't allow it, and so they're not going to risk doing an interview with me or somebody else and lose their job over it. So I can't really fault them for that. Now, my perspective would be, at the very least, use a pool reporter. So if you're at a big fight and something like this happens, just take, you can do it on a rotation basis. Take one reporter, pick your outlet, whatever it is. One of the, you can rotate through the bigger outlets, or it's small, whoever, just a reputable person to go in. You go and you're able to question that official or that referee, and they'll come back and provide whatever is said, to the remainder of the press corps. But, as opposed to, they don't want to have them like surrounded by 50 people. I get that. Okay, so let one person go in the back and have the conversation, do the interview, and represent all of us in the media. They won't do that.
Yeah, yeah. I know. Same goes for us in the UK as well, with the board, etc. Do you think the rematch happens? I know Tank spoke about it being potentially ordered in May, and I think Roach said the contract was already signed on his end. Likelihood that we do see this rematch next.
Yeah, I mean, he did have a rematch clause, Tank Davis, in there. Well, here's the thing about the rematch clause. I don't know what the exact verbiage is, but I have to assume it was if he lost. He didn't lose; he had a draw. So, not quite sure if that's in effect. But yeah, they both said after the fight they want the rematch. They both said it in the ring in their interviews. They both said it at the press conference. If Tank Davis really thought he won the fight as the champion, who comes away with the draw and keeps the title, but yet he's the guy asking for the rematch, you kind of figure he's the one that probably lost the fight. I think it's a little aggressive to think it's going to take place by May, but I do think that will be the next fight. I'm not sure what else either guy would do. There's, that seems like the biggest fight they can make in terms of the publicity and also for the money. So now I saw like Shakur Stevenson, he was on his social media saying like, okay, he'll fight Lamont Roach, and I believe he would fight Lamont Roach. But the thing with Shakur is he's tied to the mandatory against Zepeda, who obviously has got to win the fight that he's got coming up against Tevin Farmer. And I just don't see. I mean, don't get me wrong; it's not like it's a bad fight or anything like that. But I don't believe Shakur against Roach is any bigger than a rematch between he and Tank Davis. So look, it's a sport, but it's also a business. I think the WBA will be fine with it. Tank is the WBA champion in the lightweight division, and Lamont Roach is their champion in the 130, one weight class lower in the junior lightweight division. So I do believe that rematch will happen, but I don't think it's going to be May. I think it'll be probably later in the year, into the summer. But it's a big fight now. I mean, the first fight did very well commercially. I don't know what the pay-per-view numbers were just yet, but in terms of the gate, it broke the all-time attendance record for a Barclays Center in Brooklyn, 19,250. The building has been open since 2012, I guess. So it was the biggest number of people for an event ever, boxing or otherwise. And it did the second biggest gate ever, right behind a Rolling Stones concert that was in excess of $7 million. They did a little less than whatever that final gate was for the Stones concert. So there's money, there's people, there's interest, there's controversy, there's a great rivalry. There are two top champions, and let's see the rematch, obviously.
For sure. We aren't done with controversial refereeing decisions just yet. We'll go over to my side of the pond.
My good buddy, Marcus McDonnell. On the hot
yeah. Well, yeah, obviously, Paddy Donovan versus Lewis Crocker this weekend. Paddy Donovan cruising very well in the fight, having lots of success, probably on his way, I think it's fair to say, to stop Lewis Crocker. And then at the end of the 8th round, a punch after the bell landed. And this is after having 2 points deducted for headbutts. Marcus McDonnell disqualified Paddy Donovan to cause absolute bedlam in the SC arena. But yeah, I guess first things first, your overall thoughts on that chaotic situation that happened at the end of the 8th round.
I thought Paddy Donovan got screwed, plain and simple. I mean, he got screwed like Lamont Roach got screwed, because I thought it was a terrible call. First of all, back up to earlier in the round when he took away the second point for the so-called headbutt from Paddy Donovan. Again, watching the replay, watching it live, their heads definitely came together, but to me, that was not even like among, I could list my top 10,000 headbutts. It was not a purposeful headbutt. Both guys were rubbing their heads together. They were in there doing the business on the inside. That shit happens. I don't believe there was any intent whatsoever. It was not worthy of a point deduction, in my opinion, but okay, you took away the point. It actually wouldn't have mattered because he was kicking Crocker's ass so easily that he was way, way ahead. You'd have to take 10 points probably to have him fall behind on the scorecards. Maybe not that many, but you know what I'm saying. But then, to make it more egregious, what happened at the end of the round, and he hits him after the bell, no question about that. But I didn't think that it was done on purpose. It was, it was after the bell, no question, but it wasn't like that much after the bell. And it wasn't like Crocker wasn't trying to throw back also. They were engaged in an exchange. He had him on the ropes and he clobbered him and knocked him out, basically. And I thought if you're going to do something in terms of to punish the guy, you really think that it was that bad, you could take a point away from him. You might even take 2 points away from him. But to take a guy who's won every round of the fight, basically, and there's no reason why you would do it after the bell. He's on his way to a victory without question. To disqualify him in that moment, I thought was extremely harsh and extremely uncalled for and absolutely ridiculous. And just another situation that Marcus McDonnell finds himself in with others, things that have happened in his career. And by the way, he was not in position at all to stop the round. He was like taking a powder 10 feet away. He never warned them, said, hey guys, 10 seconds or whatever, the clapper hit. He wasn't there poised to jump in. He just was like off on a Sunday drive off way apart from them and had no chance to get in there in time to break it up. He did a shit job in that fight. End of story. And I would tell that to Marcus McDonnell's face.
I was going to ask you that. That was the next thing I was going to say. The positioning at the end of the round. Because Paddy Donovan said to me, "Look, I didn't hear the end. I didn't hear the bell.
I believe him. I believe him. Watching the fight, I believe him."
As I was saying, and Andy Lee was very, very incensed. Very, I've interviewed Andy many times. I've never seen him that angry before. And he said, his question as well was saying, like, you don't know what damage that last punch does to Lewis Crocker. So when you factor in all those things, how bad can you question that position of McDonnell, especially in that last?
He was not in position where you're supposed. Steve Willis on the tank fight was in position. He just fucked up the call. Yeah. McDonnell wasn't in position, and he also fucked up the call. So, which is worse? You tell me.
One thing with Donovan, though, and Team Crocker have had their complaints about it, was his use of the elbow. I spoke to Billy Nelson yesterday, and he was pretty incensed to me. He said, the elbow is what cut Lewis Crocker under his eye. And he said to me, most of the damage done to Crocker was from headbutts and elbows and stuff, and not really punches. But is it right for Team Crocker to potentially be a bit aggrieved by that, especially when it comes to the elbow? I saw a video where it looked slightly intentional from Donovan. So on the other hand, is it right for them to have a point there?
I mean, they can make that point. I mean, I didn't necessarily see it like that, but obviously I wasn't watching it that closely. I'm not there at the fight. I would say to this, he was down on every card by a lot. Do better in the fight and don't worry about elbows. And if you feel it's that, look, as well as I do, guys can resort to the street. If the referee's not going to take care of you, you get him back if you have to and make him stop on your own.
Yeah. And another question I did ask Donovan and Crocker, Donovan and Andy Lee as well. And Donovan was pretty certain on it. And a question that I guess you have for anyone. When I asked him, do you think that Crocker was playing the game in a sense? Donovan and Andy Lee felt like they were making the most of it. From what you saw, for a guy who was losing the majority of the fight, do you think there was part of Crocker that played the game?
You mean like maybe act a little bit when he
Yeah,
got knocked?
actually,
He got knocked with he
yeah.
got knocked out with a really good shot. That was not.
Okay.
I don't think he was playing. I think he was damaged badly from that punch that did come after the bell. But I don't think that was him playing possum or anything like that, or trying to milk the judges. This is not. I'll date myself. This is not Montel Griffin taking a shot after the bell against Roy Jones and doing a performance that should have gotten him an Oscar and an Emmy for that performance. This was not that.
Another big factor for this fight as well was it being an IBF final eliminator. And I spoke to Team Crocker yesterday. They seem look categorically we're fighting for the world title next. They're going to fight for a world. That's their stance on it. Obviously, they would be mandatory for the winner of Stanionis against Boots, which is later on next month. From your point of view, do you think that that's a right decision, or the rematch ideally has to happen if you're looking at it from?
I would say that they're saying that, and maybe they believe that, but I also think that it's a business, and if you say that, that's a way to begin the negotiation for your money for the rematch, because the Boots Ennis fight or the Stanionis fight, if whoever wins that fight, not guaranteed to happen because maybe they'll go in some other direction. The IBF certainly can request a interim fight. They can ask for an exception if they go forward with another unification fight. So, yes, he is the IBF mandatory, but that mandatory is not due yet. Boots just had a mandatory against Chikadzian early in the year, so he should have enough time to get in not only the Stanionis fight, but another fight later in the year that would not have to be the mandatory. So I guess Crocker could sit around. Meanwhile, you and I both know that with the amount of people that were in Belfast for that fight, the excitement that the fight produced, unfortunately, the controversy that the fight produced, from a financial perspective, he may be much more higher paid to go do a rematch against Paddy Donovan. And that's just a reality. I mean, I thought Eddie Hearn was saying the right things in the post-fight, which is, hey, look, whatever we think about it, he is now, because he got the win on a DQ or otherwise, he's now the IBF mandatory. But, we would like to do a rematch. So I assume that they'll have the conversation with Lewis Crocker's team, and they'll make an assessment. Is it worth it to take the money that perhaps will be much bigger than the title fight to do the rematch with Paddy in the next fight, whenever that comes down the road in a few months? Or do we wait around for the title shot, which is probably not going to happen at the earliest until the very end of this year? Because, again, the mandatory is not due. He's got a unification fight, and he has the possibility of taking some other interim fight because the mandatory won't have been called yet. So, again, Crocker will have to assess that. Does he want to sit around and not fight for the next 8 or 9 months? If he does take a fight and risk risk his mandatory status, it's obviously he could lose. Or do you take the sure thing, get the big money to go do a rematch with Paddy Donovan, or I should say the bigger money, which I think will be bigger, do the rematch against Paddy Donovan. And if you lose, I mean, that's unfortunate for your situation, but you've been well paid. And if you win, you're still the mandatory anyway, and you're going to get the shot. So those are all things that the teams are going to have to weigh. Obviously, they got to get an offer from Eddie to see if there really is a reason to do the rematch. And they got to see, what it looks like, and have to make that assessment. But either way, the disqualification win puts Lewis Crocker in a good position, because here's the bottom line. He's going to get a title shot if he waits, or he can make a good deal and get the rematch with Donovan. And if he wins, he'll still be the mandatory. So they got to make all that, got to weigh all that stuff. It's not an easy, I don't think it's an easy call, but they got to see what the money is.
Do you think that there could be legs in Donovan's appeal with the IBF? Like, they want to be reinstated I assume they want to be reinstated with their position. So do you think that I guess they want a rematch order as well. Do you think that there's legs in that for them?
I mean, they'll listen to it. I haven't seen what the IBF has done over the years with these types of appeals that are appealing a call of a referee or a judge. It would be highly unlikely, because here's the bottom line. Whatever we think about the intent, the reality was, yes, he did punch him after the bell. So Marcus McDonnell was in his right to disqualify him. My perspective was, I just didn't think it was the appropriate call to make. But the reality was, it was made. And so the IBF probably will just say to them, look, that was the referee's judgment call. There's nobody's disputing that it was not after the bell. So they don't really have a case for the IBF, in my opinion. The best case that they could pursue, I believe, with the IBF is to ask for a rematch, for them to order it based on the controversy of just the overall event, not based on the fact that, I really did hit him after the bell and I didn't mean it, so please give us the rematch. They're not going to probably go for that. But I think the IBF is not going to really lift a finger in this particular case. They're not going to go against a judgment call made by the referee, who's technically called it because he did hit him after the bell. Just a matter of, do you think it rose to the level? should he DQ him. From the IBS perspective, that's not their concern. That's their concern is, did he hit him after the bell? And the answer is yes. So there's really no grounds to go to the IBF to ask for that. I've covered enough protests where I just don't feel like that's not going anywhere.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I understand that. But as always, Dan, before we do sign off, and ahead of after, I guess, a controversial weekend of so much news, there is only one place I'm sure people want to see, which is obviously your Substack, which, yeah, I guess obviously you want to give that a little plug now, feel free.
Yeah, appreciate that. danrafael.substack.com. Takes 2 seconds to punch in your email, and you can get all of my missives in your email or get a phone alert, or you can just go to the website and check things out. And as you know, Lewis, we all got to make a living. So if you want to spend a mere $5.99 a month, you get everything, even the stuff behind the paywall.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, would definitely recommend that as well. Dan, always a pleasure to speak to you. Always appreciate you taking time out to speak to me. And yeah, sure it won't be too long since we're catching up again. Yeah, really appreciate it, mate. Thank you.
You bet, Lewis. Anytime.
Cheers. Top man.